What's up, everybody? Welcome to Inside Bama Recruiting, a part of the Bama Standard Network. As you guys can see here, we got a special guest on, Brody Smoot. Welcome to the show, brother. Thank you for taking the time and getting on here, man.
Yes, sir. Glad to be on here.
So today we're going to be talking about the upcoming June 6th official visits in Tuscaloosa. We just had the first wave come through, right? So the end of May, May 30th and all that good stuff. But look, this is going to be continuing rolling for another 3 weeks here. And to make this video as short as humanly possible, we're just going to go ahead and jump into this. Brody, like myself, loves recruiting, loves talking recruiting. And let's go ahead and dive into this, man. The first one, I'm going to go and bring the list up for everybody to see, first of all. The first one we'll really jump into this is going to be the number 20 QB according to the On3 industry ratings here, Matt Ponitaskki. This is a guy people probably may not know a lot about because, well, recently he was just offered with Jet Tamala, obviously. And Matt just recently, I believe a couple of days ago, announced his official visit coming up June 6th. What can you speak on when it comes to Matt here?
You know, this is a kid that is a dual sport athlete, plays football and baseball at Archbishop Moeller near Cincinnati, Ohio. This is a kid that is a dual threat. You know, he's got several schools. Going to take an official visit to Oregon, Arkansas, Kentucky, as well as Alabama. I think this one comes down to Alabama and Oregon, honestly. You know, I haven't heard a whole lot regarding Ponitaskki. It seems like he's kind of keeping it close to the vest for right now. But, you know, him and Tamala, those are the two guys that the coaching staff offered this spring. And so I think Tamala's probably the top option. But Ponitaskki, they like him too. Both of them are, you know, athletes, obviously. Ponitaskki, he plays football and baseball, and then you got Tamala, who's football and basketball. So you're talking about two athletes at the quarterback position, and that's something that, you know, this coaching staff's obviously looking for with bringing in Keelan Russell. And so I think that, you know, I think it's going to come down to Alabama and Oregon, and I think a lot of it will stem from Tamala's decision, from what I'm hearing.
No, absolutely. An interesting side note, guys. Matt Ponitaskki just won Gatorade Player of the Year, which means Jet Tamala and both Matt Ponitaskki now have won that award. So that is an interesting thing just to throw in there. Definitely not going to be lacking on either one of those guys that we get in there. Jet Tamala, like I said, definitely 100% agree here, is definitely the top guy, currently committed to Iowa State. It seems like there is a flip coming, especially when you consider these guys coming in for unofficial visits and then setting the official dates. Obviously, Jet Tamala having his unofficial on May 30th. Jet Tamala having his May 30th. But with that being said, moving on the list here, number 3 running back, Derrick Cooper. This is not a guy I feel like we have really much chance to get in. Look, Xavier Crowell, right? And then there's a host of others. When you talk about Ryan Estrada, even bringing on KJ Edwards, which canceled his visit. And then the Illinois commit as well. I mean, there's just so much to this running back room when we consider this. What's your thoughts on Derrick Cooper? Me personally, I just don't see this personally happening.
You know, Alabama's taken several visits down there to South Florida to check in on Cooper. You know, I know he's got a close relationship with Coach Gillespie.
Oh, yeah.
Alabama likes Cooper, but, you know, like you mentioned, Crowell, he's Alabama's to lose. You're talking about an in-state kid. Actually helped Alabama recruit this past weekend while he was at Georgia. And so I think ideally Alabama just wants to sign one. But, you know, if Derrick Cooper were wanting to commit, I think that'd be a different avenue that they'd have to look down. But I think the Cooper, man, I think he's Miami's to lose at this point. You know, grew up a Miami fan. You know, he's from that area. They've had a lot of success recruiting Chaminade and Madonna. But we'll see how things go. And you know, with him, Jonathan being the number 3 running back in the country, you know, he's getting a whole lot of NIL from these other, you know, various different programs. And, you know, I think that it's going to be Crowell and possibly Estrada or somebody else that comes on, you know, during the fall. I don't see Cooper ending up in this class.
Same, 100% agree with you on that. Moving down the list here. No, this one kind of caught me by surprise. There was so much movement between Darby and then now Williams coming in with this one. The number 104 wide receiver in this class, Brian Williams, coming in. And it seems like a lot of these LSU guys, Tristan Keys and a host of others, have been so interested in LSU, but have made unofficial and now official visits when you're talking about coming up to Tuscaloosa. What's your word on Brian Williams?
Man, this is definitely an interesting player out of Florida.
Yeah,
Like you alluded to, you got kids that are committed to LSU, and they're very close. They have close relationships with Tristan Keys and
yeah,
Kenneth Darby, or yeah, and they got close relationships. Both of them taking unofficial, official visits, and you got Brian Williams coming in, a guy that's underrated, who Alabama really likes. You're bringing him in for an official visit this weekend. We'll see where things go. I'm not ready to say that Brian Williams is a take. But I know the coaching staff really likes him. I think he's one of those guys, that we've seen in the past. Alabama will recruit, over the course of his senior season, and kind of see where things go, kind of where all the chips fall, when it comes to, their wide receiver board. You got Keys, you got Darby, you even got Morgan, and you
yeah.
got
Warren,
Wingo. You got
yeah.
Wingo out of Florida as well, who's planning on taking an official visit. So Williams is a guy he's a good athlete, man, and it's just going to be interesting to see and hear how his official visit goes. But I think it's one of those things where you kind of have to wait and see how where certain players commit, and then you go from there. I think that's what the coaching staff's kind of idea for Williams is as of right now.
No doubt here. Move down the list. Number 3 tight end, Kaden Prothrow. Look, if there's something that's just more evident than ever, right? It's going to be Kalen DeBoer and his staff just concentrating on tight ends. We know if you go back and look at Washington, if you go back and look at Fresno State, and even all the way back to Sioux Falls, the offense is predicated not primarily, but partially on that tight end leaking down the seams and stuff like that. When the concentrations outside those hashes, Caden Prothrow looks like a stud, all that good stuff. Obviously, most of the attention is on Sutter here. We already know that. I believe his is going to be the 20th of June. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but give me your word on Caden Prothrow.
Man, I actually had an opportunity to see this kid, Prothrow, at the Under Armour All-American game, and the kid is every bit of 6'6", 220. You're talking about a three-sport athlete here out of
Yeah,
Bowden, Georgia, Bowden High School. This kid plays football, basketball, and baseball. Won a state championship in football. This kid's a baller. He's a true athlete. You got schools like Georgia, you got Alabama and Auburn, and Texas, and several other schools that are in the mix. But honestly, I think it's going to come down to Alabama or Georgia.
yeah,
As of right now, especially after official visits, it's hard to get a gauge. You kind of want to fall, for what you hear. These kids love these visits. You have to give it some time to die down, and let them process, as well as their family, the visit, the coaching staff, the campus atmosphere, everything. And if Alabama can get Prothrow on campus, which I expect to happen, unless he were to commit to Georgia following a visit that,
yep.
reportedly went very well in Athens, I think Alabama has a chance with Prothrow. He's been a kid that's always loved Alabama, and Alabama's went to visit him several times. I think ultimately it comes down to Georgia and Alabama from what I'm hearing, Jonathan.
Yeah, no doubt. And like I said, tight end's a very important position here. And look, I want to get your take on this just really fast here. Look, guys, you're going to read that official visits go great on every single article, right? So it's very hard to have a bad official visit when these schools put out the red carpet. They spend the money, right, to bring these kids in. This is not like an unofficial visit. It's nowhere near that. So I take everything that's said basically between now and June 20th with a very much a grain of salt, right? So unless these kids are willing to commit, we'll say they show up on Friday, leave Sunday, and commit on Monday, which did happen with Alabama last year with a couple of these recruits. But everything in between that, for the most part, I take with very much with a grain of salt.
Oh, for sure. Like you're saying, it's definitely, they're caught up with the glitz and glamour, and, they're loving how much attention the coaching staff's giving them. They're rolling out the red carpet for them and their family. So, of course, that adrenaline, they're going to be like, love the visit. Georgia's the team to beat. And I certainly still think that Georgia's the team to beat here for Prothrow, but Alabama's been in the mix for him for quite a while. Alabama last cycle, they got Marshall Pritchett, who's very similar, has a very similar skill set to Prothrow, a Georgia kid. And I'm sure, Jonathan, as we saw last week, Marshall Pritchett was helping recruit another Georgia kid, Xavier Tiller.
Yep.
I'm sure that he will be in Prothrow's ear. and the coaching staff's going to pitch, hey, you can come in, you and Pritchett play a similar role. You're able to learn behind him, play a lot. This is a kid that could come in and play immediately. So, my advice would be to not, listen to all this stuff, but, as me and you think, Prothrow's a kid that could very well end up at Georgia, and Georgia seems like they're in the lead. Alabama has some work to do, but as we've seen in the past, had a cold summer last year, and so it could be a cold summer again this
Yeah.
year. Courtney Morgan and Aaron Hodges and the rest of the coaching staff are able to work some more magic.
No doubt. And guys, I'll be completely honest with you. I don't like the middle two official visits, the June 6th and June. And this is any cycle we go through. It's just, the first visit, you can kind of make that impact. You hear all the glitz and glamour, like you said. The last visit, now all of a sudden you start hearing the commits and stuff like that. But everything in between feels like, well, are they visiting to visit? What's going to play out here? And you just never know what's going to go on. But moving down the list here, number 14 interior lineman, according to, like I said, everything here is on 3 industry ratings here. Samalu Utu, hopefully I got his name right here. Another stud guy, right? If there's one thing that's more obvious, it's this class is primarily focusing, it seems like, on the defensive lineman, whereas last year, right, it was the offensive line. So we kind of switched roles here. But there are some key guys here, and I feel like he is one of those guys. So your take on him?
Like you said, it definitely it's apparent that this coaching staff is prioritizing recruiting the defensive line. But these guys that they're recruiting up front on the offensive side of the ball, you're talking about good interior offensive linemen and really good offensive tackles. And looking at this list right here, Jonathan, he's the only offensive lineman at this time coming into town. So he's probably going to have a lot of one-on-one time with Chris Kapelovic. I'm sure his player host, I don't know this for certain, but I would have to imagine it's probably Jackson Lloyd. Talking about another kid from California that chose Alabama and was able to go through spring ball. So, I read where Utu visited SMU last month, and he's got Texas, an official visit to Texas after Alabama. On 3 has Washington as the favorite, but I've heard really good things, about where Alabama stands with his recruitment, and I think it'll only get better after he's able to come in, learn a few things, see where Alabama wants him to be, get his family on campus so they can experience everything, and he's a priority. I don't think Alabama's going to sign 5 offensive linemen like they did last cycle, And so I think they're being very selective, and probably ideally they would like to sign 3 from what I'm hearing. And Utu is definitely one of those guys.
No doubt. So, and to speak on that a little bit more as well, what I feel like is, guys, like, you're not going to have these huge recruiting classes with a bunch of 5 stars, in my opinion. A lot of Alabama fans are saying, well, these guys aren't super highly rated. Well, here's the deal. Here's the reality of the situation. Last year, we spent a lot of money on the offensive line, right? You can't do that every single season. NIL is a thing now. It's a part of what happens, revenue sharing, everything else, right? So a lot of these guys, you got to really account on your talent evaluation. This is where Courtney Morgan, and Chris Kapelovic and these guys come into play when it comes to figuring out these gems, right? That may not be the number 1 or number 2 guy looking for $2.5-3 million a year, on an NIL deal, right? So, you got to take that in consideration as well. Moving down here to the number 13 edge, Jaquez Wilkes. What's your thought on him?
Man, Jaquez Wilkes is a kid that is a 2-sport athlete out of small town Wadley, Alabama. I'm not too far from Wadley, so I know where, he was born and raised, and he's doing his thing over there at Wadley High School. This is a kid that I've been hearing about for years, and he's getting recruited by, big schools. You got Miami, you got the big hitters, Texas A&M, Auburn.
Yeah.
I would say, Jonathan, that this one is trending in Auburn's direction. With Alabama getting him on campus, it definitely helps their chances. But as far as the edge position is concerned, I look at guys like KJ Ford, Xavier Griffin, Tank Jones, players of that caliber. I think that the staff really likes Wilkes, but I'm not sure that Wilkes, from what I've heard and been told, has that same kind of interest that the coaching staff has in him. So it's going to be difficult to get him basically, and basically from Auburn's backyard. I mean, this kid
Absolutely.
grew up in Wadley, which isn't about an hour and a half from Auburn, and is related to Terrell Zachary, who played receiver at Auburn. And so, it's going to be difficult to fight off Auburn and Miami. I think those are the two schools, and we'll see. What Alabama decides to do at the edge position, but I definitely think it's going to be a tall task to get Wilkes to Tuscaloosa, from what I've heard.
No doubt. And when you look at this class as well, by the way, the edges we already have committed, which I love, Chamarian Matthews, who I've already spoke very, very highly on. And I thought he was widely overlooked. And I still think he's underrated, to be completely honest with you. When you go and watch his first step, him able to bend the edge, all that great stuff. I could talk about Chamarian Matthews for an hour by itself. But, as a class as a whole, when it comes to this one in particular, it seems like the edge is really great. And I 100% agree with you. I definitely don't think Wilkes will end up in Tuscaloosa. I think he ends up, at the Plains for sure with Auburn. And mentioning the edge position here, another one, number 17, the number 17 edge in this class, Kamari Brooks. I have very similar feelings that he personally won't end up in Tuscaloosa, but go ahead and give me your thoughts on this.
Like you're saying, the school to beat is definitely Georgia. But I will say that Georgia was trying to get him to not take any more official visits, and he is bound and determined to make it to Tuscaloosa and see what Alabama's pitch is. Alabama has been on Brooks for quite a while now.
Yeah.
Georgia as well. I was reading today where he's, Jonathan, he lives like 15 miles or something away from Athens. So
Yeah.
you're talking about a Georgia kid, probably grew up a Georgia fan, and Kirby Smart's recruiting prowess, as well as Glenn Schumann. So it's going to be a tall task for Alabama, but getting him on campus is a good sign. I think, as I was alluding to earlier, he's kind of similar to Kaden Prothrow. You're talking about a Georgia kid that you're trying to basically get out of Georgia's backyard here with Brooks. But Alabama really likes Brooks, and he would definitely have the green light to commit. But we will see how the visit goes. But at this time, I would probably lean Georgia, but I don't think Alabama's too far behind. But we'll just see how his visit plays out.
No doubt here. And look, in case, we've gotten players out of Georgia, most notably Justice Haynes. Clearly, dad played for Georgia. This dude was basically a lock there, and then he comes to Bama. Obviously, he's not there anymore. It doesn't pan out, but that's beside the point. And then you consider what Courtney Morgan and Kalen DeBoer and the staff has done going out to the West Coast, getting those guys. We talked about Sincere Johnson out of Glenville, out of Ohio State's backyard. He isn't committed, but the fact that we're in that top just says a lot on its own. But moving down here, the number 2 linebacker, Xavier Griffin, who obviously decommitted from USC, big time recruit that we're trying to get in with Tank Johnson and really seal up this class in the linebacker position. I'm super high on Xavier Griffin. Obviously, he's a versatile linebacker. He's a thumper, all that great stuff. And I've been preaching for I'd say about a month and a half that I think he's an Alabama guy, because even though he was committed to USC, I believe it was since last July. Correct me if I'm wrong here. It seems like Courtney Morgan and those guys lived in his backyard, essentially, right? Camped up, still recruiting him the whole time he was committed to USC, just refused to let up. So your thoughts on Xavier Griffin?
Man, I really love Xavier Griffin. This is a great kid, a great athlete out of Gainesville High School in Georgia. Jonathan, he's got Jarian Matthews in his ear. Both of them, both of them are Alabama natives. Griffin's from Alabama originally. I'm not sure if a lot of people know that, but he's from Alabama. I've spoken to his mom. She's an Alabama fan, so you know where her heart lies. Griffin, I think his decision to commit to USC was a little bit premature. And, I think he recognizes how much Alabama wants him. He's a need. He's a player that you need to have on your roster. And the coaching staff, they're aware of that. Like you said, Courtney Morgan, Kalen DeBoer, they virtually live in Xavier Griffin's backyard. They have this spring and heading into the summer. So it's definitely big to get him on campus. He visited Ohio State, has visits planned to Florida State as well as Texas. I think this one is definitely going and or heading in Alabama's direction, and I think that he's going to end up in a Crimson Tide uniform from everything that I've heard, and the fact that he's an Alabama kid. I mean, this kid is, they're rolling out the red carpet, Jonathan, before he even makes it to campus for an
Yep.
official visit.
Yeah.
Like, they're taking him and his family out for dinner and stuff. You got multiple members of the coaching staff visiting, and Chamarian Matthews, like I said, he's in his ear, and I don't see any way that Xavier Griffin does not end up in Tuscaloosa.
Same. And for everybody listening to this, make sure to leave in the comments below what you guys think about this as well. But there's a reason why some of these players that have committed are in the visits they're visiting, right? Chamarian Matthews didn't accidentally end up on a June 6th official visit. This stuff happens, right, for a reason. So, but moving down this list, a guy that seems like Alabama's catching a lot of steam on here moving forward. And we're talking about the number 2 safety, Jere Edwards. It seems like from, I would say, a couple months ago, I was like, a little bit of interest, and it started to gain a little bit of steam. And for the past, I would say 2 weeks, me personally, it feels like he is coming on strong to Alabama. And there's a strong possibility that we do end up with Edwards. But give me your thoughts on him.
Last cycle, Alabama signed one safety. That was Ivan Taylor.
Yep.
And this cycle, I think that Alabama would love to sign one elite safety. But if you could get 2, you could get Jet Washington and Jere Edwards. That's 2 that Alabama would be welcoming. They would welcome that. And I know that for a fact. Jere Edwards is a kid out of St. Francis Academy. Alabama has a history recruiting that school. From Chris Braswell, Darian Dalcourt, Ayabi Anoma. I know he didn't pan out. Cameron Howard, he's from St. Francis Academy, the safety, redshirt sophomore at Alabama, and he's been in his ear. And Edwards has been listening to the coaching staff, and he's going to be on campus this weekend. And Rivals is Adam Gorney placed a prediction for Edwards to end up in Tuscaloosa. So it's I think, Jonathan, that it comes down. He has a close relationship with the Auburn coaching staff and several players. I believe Woodby, the defensive back, he was teammates with him at St. Francis Academy. And so they have a close connection. But, Alabama is going to put the full court press on Edwards as they did with Jet Washington. And I think their ultimate goal is to pair them up together. And I think they have a great shot at doing so. And like you said, it seems like it's trending Alabama's way. We'll see how the visit goes and go from there.
And guys, you never know what can happen on these visits. And there's even times where obviously I've talked to these recruits now. They're like, look, I made my mind up months ago, but I'm still going to go through the recruiting process because their family wants to, or they just want to experience that process themselves. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but it's kind of what happens, right? Sometimes. And you mentioning pairing up Edwards, you know what I mean? Like with Jet Washington, it was like me, which is the next guy we'll talk about here, pairing up, Jordan Edmonds with Dijon Lee. One guy's 6'2.5", one guy's 6'4", the length. They're both, in my opinion, boundary corners, right? That shuts down that half of the field. I don't know how you would throw the ball on the field with the safeties and the corners we would have there. Matching up with the versatility on the linebacker position, it would be a nightmare for any offense, right, to be on the field against that. So, but yeah, give me your thoughts on the next one, who is already committed to Bama as of right now, the number 2 cornerback in the class, Jordan Edmonds. We can speak an hour on these guys, but we'll wrap it up here shortly, guys.
Man, Jordan Edmonds is a uber talented athlete, out of Marietta, Georgia. He's been recruiting for Bama. We got him basically out of Georgia's backyard. And Edmonds is a guy that's actually trained with, Dijon Lee and Xavier Brown up in Atlanta. This is a kid that I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, but I want to say that he was scheduled to visit the last weekend.
Yes,
and he moved it up.
Yep.
He bumped it up, to help recruit guys like some of these Georgia kids, like Xavier Griffin, Kamari Brooks, Kaden Prothrow. And so Edmonds is locked in with Alabama. This kid, you're talking about 6'2.5", 6'3", 175 pounds. You put him on one side, you put Dijon Lee on the other, and not to mention Xavier Brown. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how teams are going to throw the football on that secondary. This Edmonds, man, he is special, and there's a reason that he is ranked the number 2 cornerback in the country. But getting him on campus early and trying to help Alabama recruit some of these guys, because, like you said, Jonathan, June 6th is it's always a weird official visit group. And, it's right after that first group of visits. Brooks and Prothrow both went to Georgia. And so that Edmonds and Matthews, they're both going to be in their ear. They're like, hey, let's create this Georgia to Alabama pipeline and keep it going. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm glad to see that Edmonds is in this official visit group for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Moving down here to my favorite, and look, guys, he's not the most popular guy on this list, right? When it comes to like Jet Washington and a multitude of others, but the number 14 edge in the class, Jarian Matthews, who me and Dan Williams has been on for a while now. Look, I don't want to stretch this too much, but when I watch his film, he has Will Anderson vibes, right? So I'm not saying he's that dude, but the potential seems to be there, in my opinion. When you look at the first step, the bending, the capability, the potential, all that good stuff. Give me your thoughts on Chamarian Matthews.
Man, Chamarian Matthews is a great athlete. He's got great bend. He's physical off the edge.
Yes.
I think that you could play in multiple positions along the defensive line. You're talking about possibly Bandit, possibly Wolf, defensive end, various different roles for Chamarian Matthews. He's an Alabama native that transferred to Gainesville High School to team up with Xavier Griffin. I mean, that's got to be one of the best duos in the state, if not the country, man. And his mother is actually an Auburn fan, so I found that interesting. He took an official visit to Auburn last weekend, but it was her birthday, so that might have been planned ahead of time. So Alabama fans shouldn't be worried about Matthews going anywhere else. I feel like he's locked in with Alabama, and he's another player that's coming in, to help recruit this weekend, and a player that I'm really high on and really glad that he's a part of the class.
No doubt here. Now moving on to the last one, and we'll wrap this up, guys. The number 32 defensive lineman in the class, Chamarian Johnson, already committed to Bama as well. The last 3, like I said, have been committed. I did a video with him and Chamarian together saying, look, I feel like this dude can play 0-3 technique, whatever it may be that's needed on this defensive line. And it seems like Kane Womack is recruiting versatility on this defense almost more than anything. And for you NFL buffs, in case that sounds familiar, that's what Bill Belichick did with the Patriots, right? He valued versatility almost as much as anything when you look at the style of defense he ran. And, well, it's very similar to what Kane Womack is putting together here. So where versatility is key, being able to move around your linebackers, your defensive linemen, all that good stuff. But your thoughts on Chamarian Johnson?
Man, I'm really excited about Chamarian Johnson. He's a guy that early on he kind of flew under the radar, but it's definitely burst onto the scene. I saw where he had a spectacular spring game. He had like 9 tackles, was living in the backfield. This is a kid that Alabama's really high on. I think that he's one of those versatile guys like you were alluding to, Jonathan, that can play multiple positions. That's what Kane Womack is looking for in his defense. Basically, positionless defensive lineman. I kind of get that from Nate Oates playing positionless basketball. That's what I think of when it comes to Chamarian and Chamarian. And they grew up together. I want to say that Chamarian's got an official visit coming up to Auburn after he's in Tuscaloosa this weekend. But I don't see either one of them flipping. To the other school across the state. And I think that Chamarian is a kid that he's really going to be a valuable depth piece. And, he's got a lot of upside, and he's not reached his full potential yet. The same as Chamarian Matthews. And I'm just excited to see, what he can do in Kane Womack's defense.
No doubt. So with that being said, that's wrapping up everything coming up for the June 6th official visits coming up. So guys, make sure to leave in the comments you guys' thoughts on all this stuff, but just a real quick take, like a minute or less or whatever, your thoughts on how things went for May 30th. I personally was hoping we'd get one commit by Monday or Tuesday. Me personally, I was hoping it would be Titan, maybe Nolan Wilson, one of those guys. realistically probably not going to happen. But either way, give me your thoughts on what happened this past weekend.
It was a big weekend for Alabama. Getting in some high profile guys, some guys that they are very high on. Titan Davis, he's a kid that really likes Alabama. And I heard that he enjoyed his visit. Malachi Lee is a guy that he was raving about his trip to Tuscaloosa. He brought his family as well as he's related to Tua Tagovailoa, so Tua's parents were there. And they were in the ears of him as well as other recruits there. I heard that Jet Washington's visit was going well. Last time I heard, a guy like Nolan Wilson, didn't hear a whole lot about his visit, but he's a priority target for Alabama and has been to Alabama multiple times. And I think Alabama stands a good chance to land his commitment. Talked to J.J. Finch. He said his family loves Alabama, and the coaching staff has taken the initiative to get to know him outside of football, and that's an aspect that he really likes. That's a guy that I got my eye on, a guy that hasn't really been talked about a lot, that could play multiple positions along the defensive line. So it will be interesting to see how several of his official visits go, and that's pretty much what I got. But overall, I think it was a good weekend for Alabama, which most weekends aren't going to go bad after official visits. And like you said, you would have liked to seen a commitment, but I think that a lot of these players nowadays, they want to see what every school has to offer. And so July, like last year, I think July is going to be a big month for Alabama.
No, absolutely. So, this recruiting is going to be ramping up more and more week after week. And then obviously July being, in my opinion, the big month. We get so many commits starting, I believe, the 23rd. We get people starting to commit July 4th, 5th, obviously. Actually, July 2nd is another one. So many coming up here, but definitely a lot to pay attention to. But, all right, that's all we got for today. Brody, would you like to let everybody know where they can find you at?
You guys can find me on X. It's my name, Brody Smoot. And, I post everything from Alabama football, recruiting, a lot of recruiting, content. And I'm trying to get more interviews set up with some of these prospects and basically keep everybody that's Alabama fans, up to date with the different sports and news that's going on, because, nowadays it's difficult to, keep up with all the stuff that's going on in the different sports and stuff. So, I greatly appreciate the support, and I'm glad that you let me hop on here, Jonathan. And I look forward to getting back on here next week, man.
There we go, guys. Make sure to go and follow him. And all his information will be in the description below as well. That way you don't have to look through the ticker or anything else going on as far as the screen goes. But appreciate you once again getting on here, Brody. And as always, everybody,
roll down tide.